go ahead and get started. Thank you guys, everybody, for coming to our office. We are super appreciative. My name is Carrie Stevens. We've got Taylor as well. As you guys can see, we're a little tight in our space, but this is actually great. This is actually the second space we've been in as a company. We started about a year and a half ago. We were in an office with 3 other companies, and it was cramped. And we moved into the space a year ago, and it felt so big. And now we're up to about 10 people in our office. So we're actually moving in another week or so down to a bigger space. So thanks for coming into our office and being with us today. We're going to give a little bit of an introduction on the Garage Group, what we do. This is not about kind of talking about our services, but we're going to talk a little bit about what we know to be true and talk a little bit about some of these big companies who are acting more entrepreneurially. So just a quick intro on myself, and then I'll let Taylor introduce herself as well. As I mentioned, my name is Carrie. I'm a local Cincinnati and went to Xavier. And from there, I was with Procter for about 9 years and in the market research function. And about a year and a half ago, I decided to make the jump into the startup space and come to the Garage Group.
And my name's Taylor. I am originally from the Chicago area, but went to undergrad at Miami University, so I've been around here for a while. And before starting at Garage Group in January, I was previously at a marketing research company called Burke for about 5.5 years doing qualitative research, and then came on to Garage Group as a research consultant.
Awesome. So if some of you may or may not be familiar with the Garage Group, so just at the very heart of what we do, we help companies innovate and grow more like a startup. And so part of who we are and everybody that you'll meet on our team is very involved in the startup ecosystem here in Cincinnati. So we've got a lot of startup companies that we sit alongside here in Longworth Hall. We do a lot of startup weekends. I sit on the board at Xavier's entrepreneurship program. So Jason leads our lean startup circle here in Cincinnati. So we're very involved into the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and we know a lot of truths about entrepreneurs and what makes them so successful, why they're able to completely disrupt industries that have been around forever. And so really this talk and what we're going to talk about is what are some of those truths that enable startups to act the way that they do. And we also know, having had some of the corporate background, we know that big companies can't just take what they're doing and try to do it themselves, because there's a lot of barriers to that. So our mission and behind what we're doing is taking the beauty behind what they do and translating that into the corporate space. So they might not be able to do some of the things that startups can do, but what can they do to apply that thinking and to apply that kind of mindset? So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the truth of what the startups do and how to what the hack is for a big company to be able to translate that into something meaningful for your business. So first, why innovate and grow like a startup? So when I was at P&G, actually, when I started looking at the Garage Group, my immediate thought was, well, we're kind of a slow-moving ship. What does that actually mean, and how do we actually innovate like a startup? And what's interesting is, I was at the Signal event last year with P&G, and Mark said, our ability to innovate and grow like a startup will be our competitive advantage as a company. And when we talk a little bit about what that means, we use this chart a little bit to talk about that. So first of all, if you guys work in a big company, there's turbulence, whether it's, you've got a fire drill at Walmart's threatening to discontinue your SKUs on shelf, whether it's a new competitive threat, there's always going to be turbulence, and that will always continue to be true. But there's a couple other factors that are pretty interesting that are going on. One is, from a talent perspective, we're seeing a lot more of this millennial mindset. So there's been a growth, 542% growth in the number of entrepreneurship majors that are coming out of college. So you're getting these millennials who are wanting to come out of college and be entrepreneurial, and yet they can't afford to go start their own business. So they're coming into some of these big companies and wanting to have a significant impact with these companies. And so if we can enable them to unleash that power, we're only going to set them up for success. But the other thing is in this tech space. I think everybody in the room knows that the pace of technology is accelerating at a pace that is unprecedented. That's a given. But what does that really mean? There's a book out there called Inevitable, and it talks about the 12 technological forces that are going to shape our future. And one of them that I just found astounding is we've all seen artificial intelligence. We've already started to hear about how it's going to disrupt industries. But when we look at the tangible effect that just artificial intelligence is going to have, for example, they talk about it as what electricity did for the Industrial Revolution, artificial intelligence is going to do in today's world. So before, when you didn't have electricity, you had to wash your clothes manually, and then came the washer dryer. The same thing is going to happen with artificial intelligence. So Instead, now it's going to be a place where your clothes go into the washer and tell the washer and dryer how it needs to be cleaned and at what level. And what that means is, it's not just these great big technology industries that are going to be impacted. It's the CPG companies of the world that are really going to be impacted. And they talk about, you think 30 years ago was a good place and a good time to start a company. We can literally see thousands of business models coming out to where it's going to say, we're going to take something that was not a smart object and make it smarter. Something like a washer and dryer that's not smart today, and we're going to make it smarter. And when you think about all of those kind of coming together, it begs the question of how, as a big company, do we stay at the pace at these startups? And you have to continually operate at the pace and start pushing the boundaries and our thinking to come out beyond just the current business model, because as soon as you just start banking on your current business model, it's going to change. So that's really why, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those truths.
Great. So with that context in mind, the first truth we're sharing is a what needs to be true mentality breaks through existing paradigms and models. So entrepreneurs and startups by default have limited resources, so really out of necessity, they must be laser focused in on building out only the most critical components of their business. And simultaneously, they open up their thinking to really lean on that what has to be true mentality in order to break through those paradigms and models to create new ones. So when having a business challenge or an innovation challenge, we encourage BigCos to take a step back and say, what really needs to be true in order for this to work? And so often what happens is that ideas will be executed up front or early on because someone's tried it before and it didn't work then, so why would it work now? Or it seems a little bit too unrealistic. But if you tweak it a little or have a little bit of creativity, that might be just what it needs to give that idea some legs to stand on. And if the idea has the potential to generate a positive ROI on the back end, then it might be worth that extra time and effort up front. So with that in mind, our first hack is focus. And entrepreneurs and startups are generally not sloppy or undisciplined as you might think, but they're actually quite disciplined and very focused in on the problem that they're trying to solve for. And a lot of this is thanks to enablers like business model canvases. And these canvases really allow for the discipline and structure needed to productively build out ideas. And a great example of this is the company Warby Parker that was founded on the insight that eyeglasses are too expensive for people to buy. But that came with the perceived consumer risk that people need to actually be able to try them on. So instead of letting this deter their business, they really focused on the what needs to be true mentality and how to overcome those barriers. So what they did was start exploring things like the virtual try-on and the at-home try-on where you send back the pairs you don't like. And this really helped them overcome those barriers and face that challenge, and it eventually catapulted them into the $1.2 billion company that they are today. So this is an example of a business model canvas, and there's also lean canvas and there's value proposition canvas, and these are tools that startups and more often BigCos are using to really help productively build out ideas or business models. So we custom create these business models for our clients, and what we do is have them step back and say what has to be true in order for this initiative to work, across what set of inputs, and also who needs to be involved in the conversation. And by focusing on those strategic things, it really eliminates the circular or outside conversation that sometimes get in the way of actually solving a problem. And we've applied this to many different companies across many different industries and many different kinds of strategic business challenges. So we also apply it in a brand architecture sense where you're taking stakeholders from all different areas or all different functions that come together to solve a common problem. And in this case, it was a bunch of stakeholders from the healthcare industry that actually all met together to solve for a better method for consumer electronic medical records. And the point of this is that it's not just startups or tech companies like the Ubers of the world that can apply these truths and hacks, but it really can be applied to any number of businesses and any number of industries.
So The second truth we'll talk about is that cross-category trends and analogs are more applicable to your business than you might think. So what we know to be true about entrepreneurs is that they are fantastic at associative thinking. And all associative thinking is being able to connect something that's happening over here and connecting it to your business or your problem that you're trying to solve. And just to illustrate this example, I saw this come out maybe two months ago, but anybody that's familiar with football knows that there's a current issue right now where helmets are not able to prevent head injuries. Okay, so the problem is that your brain sloshes against your skull, and that it's not healthy for the football player, and the helmet actually isn't doing a great job at being able to solve that. And so these researchers said, okay, the problem is the brain is sloshing against the skull. Who else has solved that problem? And so they looked outside of their category and said, okay, as you guys think about it, who else has this motion with their head and doesn't have any headaches or injuries? And they said woodpeckers. And so they looked to see, how do woodpeckers go through this motion and not have any head injuries? And the way that they do that is they actually take their tongue and wrap it around their jugular vein to prevent that injury. I don't know how all of that works, but that was the idea behind it. And so this technology came from being able to see how a woodpecker actually solved that problem. Instead of focusing on how do we create a better helmet, they got very clear on the need is we need to prevent this brain from sloshing against the skull. A woodpecker can do that, so let's reapply how they do that into the technology. And so that was a startup. That's a great example, but you on your businesses can actually do this, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. But the hack behind that is curating. And what I can tell you guys is, you know, at least when I was working on a brand or category, sometimes you get so laser focused on, this is my market share, this is the trend going on in my category, and really the point is getting out there and looking at what's going on in Kickstarter, what are some of the latest product events, what are some of those things that are going on outside of my category that are actually solving problems that I'm trying to solve. And so we actually think about it whenever we interact with clients and we help them try to come up with new ideas. We tend to have three kinds of stimulus to stimulate ideas, and we start with the current category trends, but frankly, if you're only focusing on looking at your H&P data on what's going on in the category, you're not really going to push far out into breakthrough innovation. We start looking at adjacent categories, and then really where some of the fun happens is in the analog space. And there are a couple of critical elements to really have to make this work. One is getting very clear on the need that you're trying to solve first. Before you go start looking at all of these different examples, what is the need that you're trying to solve for? The need in this particular example was, I've got this happening with the brain, how do I do that? So as you think about your category, what is the really specific problem? And then going out and curating hundreds of examples of other people that have solved that. So where I've seen this maybe go awry sometimes is not totally clear what they're trying to solve for, or they only look to 3 or 4 examples of other brands or companies that have tried to solve this. So whenever we interact with a client, we'll bring hundreds of examples, because what might that might work for you doesn't work for somebody else. And so really to push the team's thinking, we go off and say, okay, we're trying to solve for a brand who wants to talk about transparency. So we're gonna go look at Patagonia as a food company. We're gonna go look at Stumptown Coffee in Portland. We're gonna bring in tons of examples and ways into that need to spark some of that thinking.
So the third truth we're looking at is that faster and more meaningful progress comes from pursuing multiple paths simultaneously. So very often BigCos will have a great idea or a great strategic direction, and they will decide very early on how they're going to bring that to life, and they'll often invest a lot of time and money spent on the front end making that happen. But entrepreneurs and startups are really great at exploring tons of different ideas and tons of different directions before deciding which one to ultimately move forward with. So the hack we have for that is to explore. And exploring really helps push past those watered down, democratized ideas that the whole group could agree on, and really pushes people outside of their comfort zones and oftentimes outside of the traditional ways they've always done something. And savvy BigCos know that there's not just one way to solve a problem, but there's potentially a lot of right ways to solve the problem. And in doing this, you're able to actually make more progress, move faster, have more options, and ultimately have a better context for why you chose the solution you ultimately went with. So a little bit more tangibly on paper here, you have the strategic objective in the middle, and then all the different directions that could solve for that around it. And then taking it a step up beyond that and also borrowing our truth and hack number one, you have the what needs to be true in order for each of those directions to work. So what we have teams do is thoroughly vet out all different options before making a decision on which one to move forward with. And an example is that we recently worked with a food company that had their strategic objective here, and it could have been solved in a number of ways, including the eating occasion, the form of the food, the flavor profiles of the food, or even the life stage of the consumer. And we had 4 distinct teams that had each one of those as their focus and thoroughly vetted out those business models, even talking to consumers and getting feedback along the way and generating ideas only within that space before deciding which one ultimately was the right choice for the company and for the objective. And another example is a project we did for Nike where they were working on a subscription model for young athletes, and they're currently exploring and vetting out 7 different options in order to bring that to life. And they actually have 7 teams that are talking to consumers and experimenting and researching each one of those before they decide which one best fits the needs of their consumers. So one other example, this was a large global retailer that had been struggling with an omni-channel strategy for a while, always coming up with sort of a watered-down approach that didn't really meet the needs that they wanted it to. So instead, we helped them come up with 4 different complementary channels where they started first with the experience they wanted to create for the consumer, and then we helped them come up with different channels that could accomplish that and deliver that for their consumer needs.
Awesome. This was a fun one to learn after I left the big corporate space. But what I know to be true about entrepreneurs is that they're some of the most humble people that you'll meet, but they're some of the smartest people that you'll meet. So you'll meet some of these, and I'm sure you've experienced that as you've been talking to some of these entrepreneurs. You're like, man, they are so smart, but they would never tell you that they're an expert in anything. And the reason is because there's a shift in how they think about themselves. So no, I am not an expert, and I don't house all of the knowledge, because as soon as I perceive myself to be an expert in something, it's changing. And so I have to constantly be on the forefront of something. And so rather than trying to become an expert in something, they're always pushing the limit on what has to be true to get ahead into the marketplace. And so that was just a real shift in some of the thinking that I've learned. And really the hack behind that is iteration. And so rather than conducting series of studies where you're memorizing facts and you're knowing the consumer and you're getting all of this accumulation of knowledge, it's much more about, I'm gonna put myself in a vulnerable position to where the people might hate the product, but you know what, I'm gonna learn a lot by getting some of that early and often feedback. And rather than waiting 18 months to validate an idea, they validated it on day 2 and have made it so much better because of someone putting themselves into that vulnerable position. And so one of the examples, actually I'll talk a little bit about Eric Rice first, but he talks about this concept of minimum viable product, and I think a lot of you guys have probably heard that, but the key point behind this is, as you're thinking about coming up with a new idea, what is the minimum offering that is needed to get the most amount of learning? And it's not about having the best product out there, and it's the best entrepreneurs are not putting the best product out there at first. They're testing some critical assumptions and letting that kind of testing dictate the learning as they go along. One of my favorite examples is Rent the Runway. So for the guys in the room who may not be as familiar with this, Rent the Runway is a site where women can go online and rent dresses, designer dresses, for a 4 to 8 day period, and they're about 1/10 of the cost. And it's really been booming over the last 5 years. But the way that they started is so unique to how many traditional companies act. And really what they did is there were these 2 women who, they were on the Harvard campus, and they said, okay, we have this idea, but the most critical question that we need to answer is, will women rent a dress for 1/10 of the price? That was the biggest question. They didn't worry about what does the website have to look like, what are the pricing strategies associated with it. That was the most critical question. That was a go, no go on, are we going to proceed forward with this or not? And so what they did is they rented a room on their Harvard campus. They got a bunch of dresses donated to them and invited women to come in and just said, okay, these are designer dresses that you can rent at 1/10 of the price. Are people going to buy it? And the answer was yes. And so the next question for them was, will these women rent a dress that they cannot physically try on? So you could come in, you could see the dress, you could feel the dress, but you couldn't actually try it on. And so the answer is yes, they solved that. The third one, which was really interesting as well, is, okay, now they know people are gonna rent the dress, they're gonna rent it if they can't try it on. Will women rent a dress that they can't physically see in person? And that was their next piece of learning. And again, the answer is yes behind that, but you can imagine by going through that series of testing, they learned the importance of the community on the site of Rent the Runway. So again, for those that don't know, when you go onto Rent the Runway, you can see women who've actually rented the dress with the dress on, whether it's a size 2, a size 8, size 16, you can actually get the feel for what the dress is actually gonna look like. They would not have gotten that if they had not run these series of quick iterative tests. And so the point being is, how do you lay out what the most critical assumptions that you need to test and allow that experience to dictate what the final product needs to look like. And one of my favorite like recent examples, we were just talking about Pokemon Go. We had I have not downloaded it, but I've seen pictures of people who've played it, and I'm sure all of you have as well. But for any of you guys who have seen it, the graphics aren't that great. The instructions are not that clear, but that wasn't the point. Those were not the most critical elements to getting this thing off the ground, right? So they essentially put out their minimum viable product and have seen Nintendo's share stock price grow because of it. So by willing to take that risk, and again, the difference being is that in a traditional corporate setting, we would have run a test on what does the pricing strategy need to look like? What is all the inventory of the dresses that we need to have? We would do all these studies before we actually put something into market. We would have had a beautiful website that could be completely off because it's the first time we've actually gotten some of that minimum viable product. So just that point on that. So even as we think about, this is the kind of stuff that you can incorporate into your everyday. This is an example, whenever we're doing idea generation, we actually bring in consumers on iPads. So as a team is developing their idea, you can go, into the other room and there's 4 consumers on an iPad willing and ready to give you some guidance on your idea. So rather than waiting 4 weeks to get input on, is this a good idea or not, you're allowing the consumer to help you build out your idea. So as you think about your own projects that you guys are working on, how do you get some of that initial feedback, which may be a little bit uncomfortable because they may hate your idea, but you know what, it's better to know now before you build something out that costs a lot of money. So, and actually this one was really interesting too from Toyota. They actually had a question around in-car gas payment functionality. And so before they built this technology of being able to pay for your gas inside the car, they actually just created some Facebook ads and a mock website and tried to see, are people interested in this? Are they clicking through? And who's actually doing that? And they've realized that women were playing a critical role in actually clicking on those ads. So again, just some of that learning that can come through some of that rapid iteration. And then the last one, and I'll end here and then happy to answer any of your questions, is that we can move a lot faster than we think we can. There are some projects that I've worked on in my history that took way longer than they should have. And there are some things that as leaders we can do. There are things that we can help to enable our teams to actually move a lot faster. And the hack behind this is to sprint. So I'm going to give some tangible examples of how you guys can do this in your company. But there's a book out there called Sprint by Google Ventures, and they actually talk about how to go from an initial idea to testing in 5 days. And really the point behind this is, if we just take 5 days and have a dedicated small team and have a dedicated objective, we can solve anything. And a lot of the things that we do with our clients, it's like we spend 3 to 4 days locked in a room, figuring things out and pushing ourselves, and you'd be surprised about how far you can actually take something. So, this is the spirit behind, if you guys have ever been through Startup Weekend here in Cincinnati, it's a team comes together on a Friday night. By the end of the weekend, they've got a full-blown idea. So it's just about this dedicated time of being able to put yourself into that kind of situation. One of the examples in the Sprint book that they talk about is Blue Bottle Coffee. And Blue Bottle Coffee is a company that's based out of California, and they've got several coffee shops in California, but they realized they needed to optimize their website. And so literally in this book they walk through, on Monday we came up with some different ideas of, we talked to consumers and tried to understand how they buy coffee online. Tuesday they sketched out some ideas and sorted some of those ideas. Wednesday and Thursday they were mocking up some initial prototypes. Friday they were testing them, and then they had some final prototypes. And they've seen significant growth in the website that they were able to pull together just by putting five days against it. And you're not going to solve everything, but you're going to get so much further than if you had a weekly meeting once once a week over the course of 18 months. So that's just the point of how can you use some of that compressed time. But the other thing that I will tell you, one of the companies that I've been so surprised about was Liberty Mutual. I wouldn't have necessarily assumed them to be this really innovative company. And they're doing things not just in a compressed time, but how they set up their culture to move things a lot faster. So one of the things is they actually have what they call an accelerating team. So rather than having a lead team, which if any of you guys have gone to a lead team meeting, you know that means weeks of preparing a PowerPoint presentation and stressing, trying to make sure you look good in front of your senior leadership. And they've, just by calling it an accelerating team, they've completely changed how people use their management. And I think one of the things I learned about one of my directors is he said, you know, as a director, I hate it when people come in and just ask me to approve things. I actually want to give input and give advice. And so with the accelerating team, the expectation is that you do not present anything. You come in and say, here are my issues, help me work through it. And you're leveraging the expertise in the room to actually give you help and guidance, and it's not in an alignment session. So just small things like that, but even they actually have some of their leaders who have an office hour for half a day a week. And again, the expectation behind that is if you have something you're trying to work on, you have 10 minutes. Anybody that goes into their office during office hours has 10 minutes to get the advice and get some guidance needed. So again, small things like that can really push you from, let's get rid of all the presentation and making it pretty part of things, and actually focus on going and doing. And some of those small changes can really help some of that. So there's more we can talk about, but those were kind of some of the truths and hacks that we know to be true. Focus, curate, explore, iterate, and sprint. So I know, what time, where are we at, Taylor? We've got 1:44. So we've got a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them, or happy to talk to you guys afterwards. So any questions, or yeah?
I'm not sure yet if this is a question or a comment. It's gelling in my head.
Yeah, sure.
But this was wonderful and really inspiring. I'm struck by how so many of the ways that BigCos, as you call them, operate that are different from this are based on fear.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I have that lens, when I think like a client like that, like all these things are terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm really curious about how you manage that fear and push through that fear with these things.
She's talking to those who could get the question. A lot of these are kind of the a lot of the opposites of what we're talking about here that BigCos do are based on fear. So how do BigCos that want to go in this direction reconcile the fear piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that starts with some of the leadership, because I think if you have a leadership that is dictating that kind of culture, you're gonna see people operating out of fear. But I think even in small teams, as you think about a team coming together to do something, when you set up the operating principle of XYZ, you know that we're gonna test iteratively and we're gonna test rapidly, then the team can come together and start pushing through some of those things. I think some of the teams that I've worked on in the past where you've got somebody that's been on the team for 15 years and it's like, I'm just trying to like keep up to speed with that person, and it requires a conversation with the team of like, okay, we've got this problem we're trying to solve. How are we going to operate as a team? So that's been some of the ways. I don't know if Taylor or Jason, if you have any additional thoughts.
I was just going to say that sometimes all it takes is a very quick opening up activity to get people over that, and you'd be surprised how fast they do get over that. If you allow them the opportunity to create or to think or come up with ideas without anybody shooting them down, those kinds of things tend to happen a lot faster than you might think they would.
Yeah. And I will tell you too, I mean, this is not a plug for us, but just sometimes having external people come in and facilitate. I mean, there's been plenty of sessions that we've been a part of where people are like, well, I hate that idea. But then when we force them to say, okay, you're assigned to this direction, figure it out, and we give them the tools and the techniques to try to figure it out, it changes the game a little bit. So that can also help. Yeah, actually, Jason's. I've been here for about a year and a half. Honestly, the reason that I got so excited about them is because I very much felt the pain point behind companies out working on a slower pace and just wanting to be a part of what they were trying to do. As we mentioned, when I joined, we were a team of about 3, and we're now about a team of 13, so it's been fun to be a part of a company that's growing as rapidly as we are. But Jason, you can give a little bit more of the context behind it.
Yeah. The heart of the garage group is just helping BigCos innovate, grow like startups. So a lot of the stuff we do is what Carrie and Taylor are talking about here, and it's just helping them to move faster, more iteratively with external perspective. And it's kind of the whole idea of startups being founded in garages and being in garages, but not being afraid to lean in and test something, to take a risk, to learn, fail forward, et cetera. So it's being able to capture that and make that actionable for BigCos. So a lot of what we do is take a lot of the startup principles that they're talking about and actually translate them.
Yeah, and I think too, part of that is, like, I think we've naturally just been around entrepreneurs for a while. I mean, I think are just friends and family members and stuff like that, and you just see how they operate differently, and you see the storms that they weather, the roller coasters that they're on, but how far they're pushing themselves and how smart they are, and just realizing how much that BigCos can learn from them. And again, a lot of the companies that we're working with, like again, Liberty Mutual has, they actually sit alongside other startups. So they give them, hey, startups, come work in our space for free, and we're just gonna sit alongside and learn about you guys. So stuff like that, where it's like just recognizing there's things that they do differently and we can learn from. Yeah.
So based off the talks that we've had, it seems like this is more focused on solutioning after you've figured it out and you're starting to branch out and talk about possible ways to go and solutions. Is that correct?
Actually, we kind of play the full realm of the front end of innovation. So a lot of times companies will say, you know what, I've got this big, massive trend of an aging population. I have no idea. I don't know what my place as a brand is in that, and I have no idea what the solutions are. So we play a lot of the role of, okay, let's get your strategy right. Let's help you start thinking through some of those ideas, and then let's help you get some wild behavioral type of learning to help you through that to get to launch. So I would say we very much play on the very, very front end of trying to figure out what the future looks like for a brand, all the way down to getting them to a specific solution faster.
Something I've noticed over the years is there's, in the few years that I've been in, is it's not a lot of the problem is not necessarily once you've gotten to that point where you're starting to look for the solution. It's that communication between the business and the solutioning team. So I mean, I'm on a project right now where we've been trying to figure out what the requirements are for 2 months.
Yeah.
So how do we give them what they want if it takes them 2 months to give us an answer of what they need? Yeah,
I mean, and a lot of part of it goes back to what we've been talking about is like, if we're trying to move faster, what are some of the current barriers to us moving faster? And it's going to be slightly different depending on whatever company you're in, and saying what has to be true to overcome those. So do we set our structure up a little bit differently? Do we have these accelerating teams? Like what has to be true to make some of that work?
She was next.
Sorry. I guess it sounds like you guys do a little bit of figuring it out for the company, but then also facilitating them themselves figuring it out. So I guess how do you know when it's time to just facilitate and sit back? And I guess especially coming from where you guys are on teams and you're doing the figuring out yourself, what does it feel like to just kind of sit back and let them kind of take the reins? And I feel like it's kind of a different
we have
mindset.
There's companies out there that will say, you tell them, here's my problem, go and solve it. And so they'll go out and solve it. And we are very much a company of co-creators because we want to unleash that entrepreneurial spirit in everybody that we're working with. And a lot of times that takes very much us working together to be able to do that. And so we actually enjoy seeing some of the sparks fly to where somebody, Taylor was talking about this exploring multiple directions. We actually had a brand that they were exploring multiple different strategic options, and a couple people were like, I hate the strategic option that I was assigned to. It's never going to work. And by just helping them think through it a little bit, they at the end of the session, they were like, oh my gosh, this is the direction that I want. We're going to win, because they were pitching against these other teams. And to see some of that stuff gets us fired up and gets us really excited. And so we very much pride ourselves on being facilitators and helping teach and helping people learn, but by paying attention to what else is going on the outside world to bring that in. So
what's fun about I was going to say what's fun about facilitating too is that we prepare for the sessions and we bring in a lot of trends and things like that, but a lot of a lot of the time we don't even know where it's going to end up because they're actively doing it in real time. So it's really cool for us too to see where ideas come from or what direction they end up going with because they're doing it in real time. So that's fun too.
Awesome.
So the companies you work with typically have a product. So I work with a market research firm. I was brought on to help this 34-year-old company that's primarily been doing focus groups, traditional, qualitative, to help them become more full service, with quantitative, and working with different technologies. So if we brought you guys in, you could help me, because I'm kind of the one-man band, helping them grow out the products, do business development, marketing message.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely work in the CPG space. So we have like Kellogg's as a client. We work with Abbott Nutrition, et cetera. But we've done work with like Lyft, Nationwide, Liberty Mutual, things that are intangible services and products. And so it's very much in the business of exploring different business models and figuring out how to make it work. And so we definitely customize based on what the specific constraints. What a constraint in the CPG industry of manufacturing is not going to exist in a world like Lyft, who doesn't have that. And so we very much, the processes and the principles are pretty much similar, but we bring in different perspective based on whatever challenge we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges in market research is there's a lot of market research firms out there. So it's finding differentiators that will make you unique and memorable. You know?
Yeah. Very cool.
One of the things that my question is kind of spurred on by that first question up front about fear. One of the things that makes this work really well for a lot of startups is that startups are really small and there's not a culture that gets in the way. And I think that in some cases there's actually the complete opposite, where big companies aren't scared because they're big and they don't have to be scared. They're safe and they're slow because they're safe, and leadership doesn't really have to push anything. How do you guys push that kind of culture out of the way during your session?
You know, it's funny, we were just working with a client and we're using Gillette as an example because as you think about Gillette has had a proven business model, and they said, we make the best razors on the market and they're going to be at a premium price. And so when they tried exploring the subscription model, they said, no, we can't make that work because it's not going to fit within our current business model. In came Dollar Shave Club, who has exploded in the market because they just thought about things a little bit differently and is now bought by it for $1 billion from Unilever. And now it's really going to make P&G think about their category and how they're going to solve for that kind of stuff. And so we try to bring some of those examples to it, because sometimes a lot of where it comes from is a sense of, this is how we've done it in the past, this is how we're going to get into the future. And I just would say that we've seen examples of companies now breaking that up. You think about the Honest Company in diapers category, to where and again, I remember having that mindset of well, they're just, they're a 2 share in the market, that I can't worry about them. But it's things like, when they continue to push the button, they're going to be successful. And so I will tell you, I don't think every big company is going to get there. But I'm a firm believer that there are going to be business models that are completely disrupted because of that. You look at the taxi industry, who's been stagnant for years, and overnight they've been overtaken. So it's not like we're trying to instill fear, but at the same time, looking at those examples where you're already starting to see it come to life.
We found too that back to the original question too, if you change the way that they're working, it actually helps them to kind of go through the process of seeing the external perspective, framing problems in new ways, the canvases that actually help to start thinking through new models. A lot of times it's not the fear they don't want to do it, it's more of helping to push them outside of the current model, et cetera. So even from a leadership perspective, a lot of the strategy things we do is more of C-suite, VP level type engagements, and it's, if you change the way that they work and have conversations and they're iterating through, they start to have options to be able to say, okay, we could go in this direction, or since we've modeled out a couple different directions, we can start to pull together a solution. And that changing the way that they have those discussions then influences how they think and gives them options. Otherwise, it's, if you're trying to get to a democratized solution like Taylor was talking about, you end up with, it's just kind of in the frame of the existing business model. And it's facilitating a lot of those conversations and allowing them to kind of take place. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions?
What was the book you said?
There's a couple of Sprint by Google Ventures.
The first one, the top tech trends.
Inevitable, the 12 technological futures that are going to shape our, or 12 technological advances that will shape our future. Inevitable. Really cool. What's that?
I said you're dropping some knowledge.
Yeah, you know, knowledge bombs coming out.
Go ahead.
No, this itself will be a book someday. You're right. With all
We actually we have a summer reading list for the folks in the garage group, so we're all reading a couple of different books right now. So we're all over the course of the summer. There's going to be tons of blogs and just recaps of the books that we're reading. I'm obviously doing Inevitable, but so those will be coming at you as well.
Go ahead.
Do you guys ever run into some of these big established companies kind of intimidated by a certain high level of innovation, like, oh, I only want you guys to innovate this much, or we're like scared of?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's, I mean, and honestly, there's sometimes people say, okay, we want to innovate, but we don't want to completely change our business model. And that's totally fine. We want to help companies get to where they need to get to faster. And so if they're saying we need to come up with a better, you know, if we need to come up with a better flavor or scent, but we need to cut our time in half, we're going to do that. And because to them that looks like innovation. I think that there are other teams that are like, we want to really break through into new business models. So it's very much meeting what they want, what they're really, really looking for.
Sometimes it's in the within the same session as well. They might have one team that's coming up with all very feasible ideas that could be implemented in the next 2 years, and meanwhile they have another team that's only coming up with breakthrough innovation that's 10 years down the road. So they can be happening at the same time.
Yeah, but very much what's very important is to say, what are we solving for? Like, what are the needs that we're solving for, and then what are the constraints and considerations as we come up with those ideas? And that's a critical question that we have to ask of how far is too far, because we'll take you far out, but if it's not going to be helpful, then we're not going to do that. So we kind of meet them where they're at.
Thanks a lot for coming by.
Thank you guys so much for coming.